All right, welcome into the channel, everybody, today. So this is not my video. It was filmed on Malcolm's Twitch channel. If you want to go over to his channel, it's SAR9EENTPEPPER. That's over on Twitch. I'm recording this after the fact. Honestly, it was a great conversation. I think we need to be having more of these conversations. And it was very civil, very, very good. I think it was exactly what we should be doing. We need to be kind of mending fences in this community. And I think it's always important to speak with people that disagree with us. So hope you enjoy.
All right. So we're vibing with Sara. I don't know how to say your last name. It's Higdon, right?
Higdon. Yeah, Higdon.
Higdon. Okay. Sorry, I'm actually illiterate, so please forgive me.
You're fine.
I came across some of your stuff. I saw you in one of Ariel Scarcella's videos, and that was why I reached out. I'm always in the market for talking to people that I don't agree with. You know, just because it's a good way to like share ideas, like, you know, grow, develop, change, yada, 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 all that good stuff. So I wanted to reach out. I appreciate you getting back to me in a prompt way. I really appreciate that very much so. I would love it if you could introduce yourself for the homies that are hanging out with us.
Yeah, so I'm Sara Higdon. I have a YouTube channel, very active on Twitter. And that's basically what I'm doing right now. I started my transition about 2.5 years ago. Obviously male to female, I think. But I guess I would be more on the gender critical side, but also kind of critical of gender critical people sometimes as well. I see myself more in the middle. I try to find, you know, some middle ground and where we can, and I guess where we can, you know, come together at. And I agree with you. I definitely like to have these conversations. I don't really like the word debate just because debate has so many negative connotations. I think people get into these screaming matches on debates. And I'm not about that. So I'm coming in here with an open mind and in good faith. I think, so just leave it at this, is that Gandhi said, an honest disagreement is often a good sign of progress. So I think these are the types of chats that we need to be having as well to kind of bring our community back together.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. So we can start wherever you want. I reached out to you. I said, I watched your video with Buck Angel. And when I was watching it, I was just kind of like writing down things that you guys were talking about, things that I thought were good topics. So I wrote down ROGD, SelfID, and then affirmation only care.
Yeah.
So I'm cool to start wherever you would like, if you have a favorite out of those that you would like to talk about.
Not really. I mean, whatever you want to know, we can talk about.
Sure. I guess we can just go in order. So I guess we can start with ROGD. So I have Lisa Littman's study here that I can pop to you in the chat, the original study. This was after the retraction and edit, and then I will drop that in the chat as well for anybody who wants to read it. So from my understanding, and I don't want to like obviously ascribe a position to you that you don't have, if you just kind of want to like run down your thoughts on rapid onset gender dysphoria.
So my thoughts with it is it doesn't, so I haven't read that study yet. I know most of the studies that kind of come out about rapid onset gender dysphoria typically are from, you know, organizations like Fourth Wave and Trans Trend and stuff like that, which I don't subscribe to their narratives and I usually don't visit their sites. But I would say that when I look at, you know, people that they are coming out as saying that have ROGD, so I guess I would say that I don't think it's necessarily real. And it used to not be real. I mean, our community used to promote against ROGD a lot when it was coming out, because it kind of ruins that narrative that we were born this way, right? That you can develop into dysphoria, which I don't think you can. And it tends to hit around puberty, which is when most people struggle with body image anyways. So just common sense would kind of tell you that sometimes people might look at something and come out and go, well, that looks nice, maybe that's where I fit in, and then they think that they're trans. And when their friends are transitioning and stuff like that, because we hear, I mean, a lot of the studies just talk to parents, right? Talk to their parents who, my kid never showed signs that they wanted this, or they started hanging out with this group of people and then all of a sudden they transitioned.
Sorry, I'm just taking notes. So my brain is kind of non-existent. It's like liquid these days. So something that I think is really important. So when we look at like rapid onset gender dysphoria, specifically the study that Lisa Lippman did, her study is just like, it can go right in the garbage. Like it is ridiculously unscientific. The retraction that she posted like speaks to that. There's a really wonderful methodological critique that was put out on Springer that I can drop in the chat for you as well. So essentially what happened with the study is that she asked parents to diagnose their kids with ROGD, but then didn't define ROGD in the questionnaire or the survey. And then she asked them to use DSM-5 diagnostic criteria, which was revised for parents to understand. So pretty much anything that comes out of it, I think, is garbage. But if we attack the idea that like there's potentiality of like the transgender craze or like a contagion where you have a group of people you know, like if I come out as trans and then all of my friends come out as trans, especially for like, you know, kids that are going through puberty, like you said, kids that like traditionally didn't show signs. I think there's a lot of different ways that we can break that down. Like for the first one, I would say a big hallmark of like rapid onset gender dysphoria, like number one, it's parent self-report. And then number two is always, you know, there were never signs. It was just kind of out of the blue, things like that. I'm unaware about like your experience being trans, but for me, even when I came out as trans, I am like a textbook trans person. I had every red flag in the book. I would have qualified for early transition if it was a thing when I was a child. And even to this day, my parents are like, I had no idea. There were no warning signs, even when I came out as a lesbian. So I think it is pretty biased and just kind of useless to go straight on parent report data, just because, I mean, I don't know if you have kids. I know parents of kids where they show all kinds of warning signs for all kinds of things, but they just kind of close their eyes and don't notice it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And to the other side of that as well, it's like, now it's like parents sometimes want to find stuff that's not there, when we should just be letting kids be kids in a lot of these ways, let them develop into themselves.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I was very much the same way. I guess I wasn't that much because I was a stereotypical male. I mean, I was into athletics. I joined the Army after I graduated college. So I got married, and now to this day, I mean, it's the same thing. I thought I was throwing flags everywhere. I mean, I dressed up for my wife and she didn't know. So like that type of stuff. I thought I was throwing flags, but nobody picks up on those flags when they're really there, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of the idea behind rapid onset gender dysphoria is like one, a way for parents to kind of like throw their hands up and be like, no, my kid isn't trans. See, it's this thing. It's not that they're actually trans. And I think the other thing that's that is kind of an issue when we talk about rapid onset gender dysphoria is that it's framed around the idea where, I don't know if you can relate to this at all, but at least from my side, like being FTM, like a lot of people will describe women or girls as like illogical, hysterical, emotional beings, like a girl's in puberty, being a girl's heart. Of course, they want to get away from girlhood, these kind of things. And I think that's like a poor reflection, because I think anybody who is trans knows that being trans, especially like in youth and adolescence and kids, are like fucking evil to each other. So I feel like the idea that they're like, oh, like, you know, I just want to be popular at school, so I'm going to identify as trans. I don't know about you. I can't think of a single like probably place in America where it's like hip or cool, or that parents aren't going to be like, hey, like, what the fuck are you doing? I feel like it's just like a negative framing of how a lot of time like puberty intensifies those feelings of dysphoria. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. It absolutely can. Now, and you probably are more closely tied to like this set of the community as well. So are you seeing that it's mostly people that actually want to transition, or it's a lot of the people that are coming out as non-binary, or do you see non-binary as like this middle ground, I guess?
I think it depends. So I think for a lot of people, non-binary is kind of like an exploratory label for people. You know, they're not really sure like how they feel or how they identify. So it's a way for people to kind of like get their foot in the community and kind of feel around and be like, okay, maybe this is for me, maybe it's not for me, so on and so forth. But in my experience, in trans masculine spaces predominantly, I would say that most people identify as like binary in one way or another, and are a little bit more stereotypically like binary presenting, or, you know, they want to be seen as like men or guys or whatever. I think that's a little bit more prevalent. I think the issue is that social media kind of like bombards us with the craziest people, or craziest in quotation marks, obviously, or like the most
Yes.
obscure presenting people as possible. So we have this um like exaggerated view in our minds that everybody that's coming out as trans is like, you know, a blue-haired 14-year-old who spends all their time on Tumblr and stuff like that. I think that's the issue of where that comes from.
Yeah, and I get that too, and I'm glad you kind of said that, because at least we can kind of agree on that. That, I mean, you say the craziest of that community, whereas I can tell you all the time that you know, on my side of things, I call out gender critical people all the time as well. So I think we can agree that there's a lot of stuff being pushed from both sides of the aisle that don't really represent what we in the middle here kind of are, right?
Yeah, I think something that's really important though is that like even if somebody is like what we would call now like a trans trender, or somebody who is like maybe doing it for attention, maybe doing it for ulterior motives, or, you know, whatever, or maybe it's just like the wrong path for them, right? And they don't really know yet. I think something that's really important is the way that we attack these people in our community is it's really toxic. And I think the only thing that it does is makes people dig their heels in more. I think the idea that if somebody comes out as trans and they say, you know, like I think I'm trans, blah, 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 whatever, I want to get on hormones. And in turn, you have people saying, you're not really trans. They're kind of like, fuck you, bet. You know what I mean? I feel like it's a really tactful way. I think prioritizing like the best choices for people that are possible, like allowing people to make those choices is really important. I think it just gets lost in
Yeah.
the idea that we need to like police our community super hard and be like, we can't let these people in because they might be faking. I think that's kind of where like the discourse gets lost, because like maybe they are, maybe they aren't, you know, like people got to figure their shit out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with that actually, because I mean, I will be the first to say that I am not going to invalidate somebody's transness until they aren't trans. But I will just say we don't know who the trenders are, but there are trenders out there, and they will this if and when they actually, you know, if they go through a transition, or when they detransition, or when they desist, or whatever you want to call it, those stats are going to get thrown in our face as if, see, um, being trans in and of itself is just a mental illness and it's not valid. And I don't think any of us really believe that.
Yeah, I think something to be like really mindful of, or something that I do my best to be mindful of, is the idea that there will always be people that will, and especially like in gender critical movements, they will always weaponize detransitioners. Like even if there were just like two, you know what I mean? These would be the people that
Oh
they would
yeah.
go to point to and look at. I think something that is really important. I've talked to a decent handful of detransitioners, and even if we just look to like Kira Bell, when Kira Bell came out, you know, after she had decided to detransition and went through with like the suing of the NHS and stuff like that, she said, I think verbatim in one of her interviews, where she was like, listen, like if I didn't have access to this, I would have like unalived myself. Like that was something that I needed at that time. And I think if we're talking about like adults in the community, like allowing people to access and experiment and like kind of decide like what's the best path for them. If it is it transitioning, is it just being gender nonconforming? Is it maybe like going to talk therapy? Like all of these things. I think
Yeah.
the demonizing of it, where it's like, oh wait, hold on, like they might detransition. I think that pushes people too hard into transition. I think that we're a little too rigid in how we're like, you have to transition this way or you're not trans, and so on and so forth, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I think we definitely have to be mindful. And I'm on record on my channel. If you go, I don't even remember which video it is. I'm not a huge fan of Kira Bell, because I think she wasn't the right spokesperson, and I don't like the fact that they put government in charge of who can and cannot transition. I think that's the wrong step. Um, but and I don't know anybody that's in my circles, at least, and you know, my circles include like Ariel and stuff like that, and Buck and all that, is everybody is in favor of social transition before transitioning. You know, before
Mm-hmm.
you put anybody on puberty blockers, social transition is something that needs to happen. So I think we're all, again, kind of in agreement there.
Yeah, I think adults and like children are two separate can of worms when we're talking
Yeah.
about like access to medical transition. I am
Yep.
like a bodily autonomy absolutist. If you want to slice off your ears and you have the money to do it, by God, please do it. I think that
I'm the
restricting
same.
access, yeah, I think restricting access to that stuff. If you're, an adult and you want to medically transition, if you have the money and the time, do whatever you want to your own body. Like I could give a fuck less.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
I think kids is like a little bit more of a challenging conversation. The one thing that I will say is it is disgusting to me how it's so politicized. I think that that should be like a choice that is between like the patient and the doctor, and everybody else should just like mind their business. I don't think that we should be making policy about this. I don't think that this should be like political pundit talking points. I think it should just be like,
Hmm.
what is the best form of treatment for this child? Like, and that should be where the buck stops essentially.
Yeah. And the problem that we see there is then it, all that they're showing and all they show are, like you said earlier, is the people that and the parents that are so gung-ho about it, like their 4-year-olds transitioning and stuff like that. I think that hurts the image of what we're actually trying to do here. And then, and I know the 80% statistic rate is a flawed study as well, but we do need more studies to know when people should be transitioning and how we should be transitioning. Even if we use the 80%, how do we find that 20% and make sure that those are the only ones that are transitioning? I think that's where I think we all have an idea that we want what's best for these kids. We just have a different way of going about it.
Definitely. And the 80% statistic, this is actually one of my favorite studies. I'm very happy that you brought that up. It's literally like my favorite one. I refer to it all the time. Um, I love reading about all this stuff in my spare time. It's super interesting to me. I can drop it here for you. It's like a 500-page study. I don't like expect you to comb through it really quick. But so essentially, the 80% desistance statistic comes from back when we would actually practice like conversion therapy. So in the study specifically, it talks about the adoption of like the Dutch model in the early 2010s, around 2012 when we changed diagnostic criteria. And like one of the cemented goals of the therapeutic model that was used up until we adopted affirmation only care, where is it is to increase the likelihood of desistance of GID into adulthood and adolescence. So that was like the primary goal of this kind of therapy. So it's not surprising that we would see like incredibly high desistance rates if that was like the goal of the therapy, that we weren't really accepting that maybe these kids are trans and it was just like, nope, we just want to get rid of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, the other flaws in the study are that it did anybody that was gender nonconforming. So a lot of people that wouldn't even be trans um, were in this study, and of course they're going to desist as they grow up. They're not going to transition. If you're a gay male, you're not going to transition because that's not what's right for you.
And that was something that was like a big issue with the DSM-4 diagnostic criteria for gender identity disorder. Was
Hmm.
part of the criteria wasn't that you had to proclaim that you were or wanted to be of the opposite sex, just that you engaged in like cross-gender behavior. So it essentially pathologized like gender nonconformity. So they lumped in a bunch of people that wouldn't have met like the criteria that we understand today. So that's part of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, this is where I get um probably the most flack from the gender critical community, though, is I am actually a fan of the Dutch model. I think that it is a good model, but I think it only works again if we have therapists that are doing the hard work. Um, and I know you guys watched my video with Buck, so you know that. I mean, I think that sometimes we have right now in the community, we do have these activist therapists that are out there that are essentially affirming gender. And if we want to, we'll talk about the affirming gender model as well. I think that when they're out here saying, okay, yes, you're trans, and then starting backwards from there, when it's one thing to use somebody's preferred name and preferred pronouns when in care with them, but to start at a diagnosis before you've even had a chance to talk with them. And I think that's what a lot of these people are doing. Because I watched your video with the detransitioner last time, and she basically affirmed that it was at the end of the therapy session. Yeah, you're trans. I would give you hormones right now if you want them.
Yeah, and I think something that's important is that Issa was an adult at that time, so I think that affirmation only care is like an excellent model for adults. Is I shouldn't say affirmation only care. I should be really specific. What's the word I'm looking for? Um, informed consent, excuse me. Informed consent is like an excellent model for adults, right? You know, you go in,
Yeah.
they say, this is what's going to happen to you. Are you okay with this? You say yes, and then you can go ahead and start. Sounds great. Fantastic.
I agree.
Affirmation only care, as far as like therapy is concerned, I think there's a lot of hysteria around it because a lot of people don't really know what it entails. People usually say that like conversion therapy bans, quote unquote, kind of encompass that therapists and psychologists' hands are tied in treating kids with gender dysphoria or youth with gender dysphoria and things like that. But the reality is that even under the affirmation only care model, there is room for psychological like exploration, like psychotherapy and stuff like that. Like, I've never heard you talk like this, or, you know, your mom says that maybe she doesn't think this is true, or why don't you tell me why you think you feel this way? Like things like that. These are all things that are on the table. And even at the end of the 6-month period where you have to go through psychotherapy as a minor to get access to medical intervention, you know, a provider can still say, you know, like, hey, like we've talked about this for a while. I'm not comfortable referring you for medical treatment. I can send you to somebody who might be a little bit more comfortable doing that, but I'm not. I think that there's just like this, a lot of people like one don't know what affirmation care only is. And then people are under this impression that if a therapist is like, hey, like, I think that we should talk about it before I prescribe you hormones, people are like, give me your medical license. And it doesn't really work like that in practice. I think that's kind of where the big disconnect is with affirmation only care.
Yeah, I think right now, in some of the culture that we have today, I think some therapists though are afraid to, you know, refer people because they're going to be seen as transphobic, or they don't want to get canceled. I think that is an issue, is how we treat some of these. I also think that's why we don't have a lot of studies on you know, trans care right now. I think the last study I've seen on like the regret rate and the detransition rate was like 3 or 4 years ago. So if you have any new studies, I want to see them, because I don't think the detransition rate has skyrocketed, because a lot of the people that I would think are transgenders are not necessarily going in and getting on HRT as much.
I think this is the one that I'm thinking of. The most recent one that I have off the top of my head right now is the WPATH study that was done in 2017. But also Fenway Health does really comprehensive research on this. I haven't dug into anything that they've published recently, but the last thing that I looked at was when was this published? I believe that this one was in 2018. I think it could be before that. They've put out a recent study. I want to say this one, let me look really quick. This one's from 2021. And I can send you, sorry, I'm just like bombarding you with links right now. So
no, go ahead, go ahead. I want a lot of these studies. I do like to read and broaden my base a little bit to see what's going on.
So the last one that I sent you, I made sure to put on there. Fenway Health does a lot of like really good survey information. They kind of like break down a lot of the transgender survey, you know, like the big survey that they do every year that's like 1 million pages long. They do a really good breakdown of a lot of this, a lot of the reasons as to like why people are desisting or detransitioning. On this one right here, I don't think this one has a raw number, but it gives percentages as to like why. Oh, there's the raw numbers right here. Just kidding. So this is the most recent one that I'm aware of, and this lines up, to my understanding, pretty well with the WPATH one that was done in 2017. So I don't think that we're having like an increase the way that people have been kind of, you know, foreboding for a couple of years. The other thing that I think is really important too is that in the US, it's really hard for us to do these kind of things because we don't have like how the NHS has like a central gender clinic. It's kind of like all over the place. So it's pretty difficult for us to get data on this kind of stuff unless we go through insurance. And the last insurance study that was ever done was with Kaiser Permanente, and they used ICD-9 codes, which were from like 1975. So it is pretty difficult to get data on this, but up to date, it lines up with the WPATH study from 2017, to my understanding.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of it though too. And I don't think we're going to really see a lot of these numbers coming in until maybe even for a couple more years, because this really didn't start taking off until about 2016. It didn't really get popular, as being trans was not popular at that point. I know people knew trans people, but it just wasn't out in the media and everything like that. I think most of the focus in the community was on gay marriage, and that was passed in 2015. And then the bathroom bills came in 2016.
Yeah. And also like Caitlyn Jenner coming out, I know was kind of like a big thing for people too. Like having like, I know that Chaz Bono counted as like an out and like famous trans person, but he wasn't really as well known as Jenner. I don't think Jenner did like a big thing in 2016 when she came out. So I think that was part of it as well too.
Well, Patricia Arquette, I think too.
Who's that? I feel like I don't know who that is. Maybe I should.
It was David Arquette's sister. She's been in a few movies and stuff. I believe she was trans. But
Let me look at a picture.
again, that was kind of the way it was. Is nobody really it wasn't being pushed out there as much as it is nowadays. And nowadays, it's all over. You know, anytime a trans person does something, it's on the news.
Yeah, I think something that I think is kind of problematic, and I don't think that there's a way to really skirt around this. I think that's just kind of the way that like mainstream media works, is that like even if, you know, like just say there were 100 trans people and like 99 of us were just like binary, like trans people that just want to like live life and kind of, you know, like do whatever, and then there was like one person that was, you know, the one that was like the stereo archetype, like SJW transgender person or whatever that they use on like Jerry Springer and shit like that. That person would be the one that was in the media, right? It wouldn't be like the 99
Yep.
other people that are just trying to vibe. I think that that's
No, you're
in
absolutely
general.
right.
That's in general a problem.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure how we circumvent that, but I think that can be part of it too.
No, you're right, because it's always, I always say it is like the people that I generally have a issue with are the very loud minority. There is a very loud minority in our community that makes us all kind of look bad sometimes. And they're the ones that get all the attention online.
Yeah, I think that works that way with like every community. Like, I mean, like
Yeah.
pick a demographic, right? Like there's always like one person. Like,
Oh yeah.
I mean, like us white people
Oh, yeah.
have Rachel Dolezal, and they're like, look at these weird white people, and we're like, oh no, we don't know her. You know, I feel like that happens like
Yeah.
regardless of community. You know what I mean?
And then it's like people, like you talked about, you know, getting care and stuff like that. I mean, I'm on a informed consent model when it comes to transitioning, so I completely agree with you when it comes to adults and everything like that. It really it kind of irks me that somebody can get a horn put in their head and not have to work and not have to get a doctor's letter, but we have to get doctor's letters to have gender affirming care. So
I think that trans healthcare in this country is pretty destitute. The only thing that I'm kind of like on the fence about it, because I think that something that's really important is like being able to use insurance to access care, because like transition related procedures are ridiculously expensive. So
yeah.
if for whatever reason we would lose access to insurance, because like I would imagine that insurance would not cover me getting like a horn put in my head and stuff like that. I think the institutional barriers are something that should probably be dealt with, like either making transition more affordable or covering everything. But I'm not really sure what we'll do about that. It'll be interesting to see how the reclassification
They
goes.
are. I think they are, because so my doctor has, I mean, she's got a podcast and she interviews surgeons and stuff all the time. That do, it's all her podcast is all about trans stuff. And she there's one doctor that does male to female bottom surgery on an informed consent model, and yeah, you can still use insurance with her.
Yeah, it would be pretty good if these things were like covered more unilaterally, or like more affordable even. So like if you didn't have insurance, or if your insurance plan doesn't cover transition related services, that it doesn't cost like a literal arm and a leg in order to get some of the procedures covered. Like even hormones out of pocket can be like pretty expensive for plenty of people. You know what I mean? It's kind of a not a great time, unfortunately. So the other thing that I wrote down was self-ID. So I know that that's kind of a spicy topic. So I don't want to like kind of ascribe positions to you that you don't believe. So if you could run that down for me, I would love to hear.
So I mean, I think self-ID it can be kind of dangerous. Just depend, and it's mostly we're dealing again with it's more dealing with trans women and women's spaces and stuff like that. And I really only think that it really comes into play when it's you know, government buildings and government making laws about stuff. It's like especially like prisons and stuff like that. I think that's probably the best example of where it can be really dangerous. I actually have a published article on the Libertarian Republic last month about rights, and I assign trans rights and women's rights. I say I don't believe either one of them exists, because the people whose rights are being trampled, like in locker room cases and bathroom issues, are actually business owners. I think business owners have the right to make whatever rules they want in there. They should be able to deny you access for whatever reason they want. And then I think the market can decide, and you don't have to go there if you don't want to. I wouldn't want to give somebody my money that doesn't let me use like the bathroom that I identify with, right?
So when you're talking about self-ID, are you talking about the idea that like somebody can, like identify as a trans woman and then have access to these spaces? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, because we've seen it multiple times where a fully functional presenting male says that they're a trans woman and they try to go access, female spaces. And that's kind of how the like in California, the new prison bills and stuff like that is, if you get arrested and you say you're trans, then they will put you in with female inmates.
So I know that Washington passed a law like this not that long ago. Up until I want to say like last year, the only like kind of examples that we had of this was in the United Kingdom. And I think something that's, as far as like prisons go, I feel like this is kind of a contentious topic in general. And this was something that I thought about when I was watching your video with Buck Angel. The idea, the existence of, or like the idea of like queer pods in prisons or like queer wings in prisons is something that I think is kind of like a band-aid fix, because what this will essentially be is like a space for anybody who isn't a lesbian. And with that, only like larger cities and larger facilities will have these wings available. So if you have somebody who gets arrested in Kentucky or whatever, they have to get housed in, the next largest prison that will have this pond, which kind of like fucks over the people that want to come and visit them. How do we move these people? All this other stuff that comes into it. Something that I think that would solve the issue as far as prisons are concerned, while taking trans people out of the equation, is just keep violent offenders away from non-violent offenders. Because we know that if you are a non-violent offender and you get incarcerated and you're surrounded by, like hardened criminals, like murderers, like shit like that, your recidivism rates go up. Like if you get arrested for like having a dime of weed and you go to a prison, like a prison, and you're there for however long and you get out, like your recidivism rate is going to go up from even just being in the system. So if we take like violent people and keep them away from non-violent people, I feel like that solves the entire issue without even bringing trans people into like the purview of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, that makes that. You're right. I mean, a lot of times they already do that. That's why they have different wings, I think, in prisons. Even in the non-violent wings, though, I still think gay men and trans women are very targeted, even among people that are not typically violent. Though I know that in California and Los Angeles, where they do have the LGBT wing, it is all non-violent offenders that are in the LGBT wing in and of itself. And I mean, people in the gender critical community called me trans or homophobic for even just asking the question whether I think lesbians might do well to be put into those as well, just because we do know that the domestic violence stats are higher in the LGBT community than in the general population. So does that mean that those people that are in prison for crimes should be in with females as well? I don't know. I just asked the question.
The other thing too that I think is important as well, like housing people demographically like that. We know that a lot of like abuse and sexual assault, especially in women's prisons, comes from like I don't want to say administrative staff, but like guards. So like the sexual assault rate in women's prisons is like astronomically high, and most of it is perpetrated by like guards. So I think about what it would be like if we had a pod full of like trans women, gay men, possibly lesbians, trans men, and you have like a bunch of guards running around when they have like this controlled population in one area. Whereas like if you have people kind of integrated with the general population, it's a little bit harder to single out and target one person as like a guard. You know what I mean? I think that there's a lot of issues as far as that goes. But with the self-ID in regards to like trans women being able to access women's prisons and stuff like that, I think that that's a relatively easy solution if we keep violent offenders away from non-violent offenders, and then we don't even have to touch the trans issue. I think that that's like the easiest way to do it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I think we can all agree. I mean, it is that if you've used your penis to assault a female, you should never be placed in a female's prison. Or if you perpetuate violent crimes against females, especially, you shouldn't be in there. And typically those people, I don't really give a shit what happens to them in prison anyways.
I mean, I think that part of prison, it like serves to protect like certain people, like, right. Like you don't, I think that the whole point would be like to facilitate a place where like the idea of rehabilitative justice, where you go to jail, you kind of learn your lesson, you kind of keep your head down, you come back out and you reintegrate into society. I know that's like not even kind of how it works, like pragmatically. But the idea that like people in prison should be like protected, like that is like the goal of the prison, to make sure that the inmates are safe and, you know, they're not killing each other and murdering each other and beating each other up and shit like that. I think the prison system as a whole could use like a good old fashioned revamp. But the other thing that I wanted to touch on a little bit was the idea of, you brought up the Wii spa, but like the idea of how you think that it should be like up to private business owners and stuff like that. How would that work for publicly funded institutions? Like if you have
So yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, yeah, that's really the only place that we are gonna have to have these conversations, if we can at least agree that businesses should be able to run their operations. I think in a lot of public institutions we can look at I think third spaces is not the right way to go necessarily, but at least offer a third space for people that don't feel comfortable in either pod. I mean, I think, and especially if you are, you know, attempting to present in a certain way, like if I'm attempting to present female, or even just somebody that's just starting out transition, if you're actually attempting to present, I think it's one thing. But if you're not attempting at all, then I think that's where we have to draw a line.
So my other question would be like, so if we're doing it where, so just like, you know, for argument's sake, like states' rights and stuff like that, like whatever, private businesses can do whatever they want. There's no state law that says this, that, or the other thing. If we're going off of like a private business's ability to like determine who is and who is not allowed in like a public restroom, how would we enforce that?
I asked this question actually the same way too. I agree. There is no way to enforce that. I ask this to gender critical people all the time. I say, if you're going to try to ban me from going into a female's restroom, and I'm presenting, how are you going to know that I'm trans without actually violating my personal property, violating my privacy rights? Because you won't, because, you know, most people at different states, you're going to have people that, I mean, your gender can be changed on your birth certificate fairly easily. So there really is no way for them to stop you if you don't present. And I actually know a lot of females that get asked all the time, or get called sir all the time, because they're more butch lesbians. So I agree. I don't think there's a way, unless you are very clearly not the gender that you say you're going into. Like, we've seen pictures of, I mean, like, dudes like not even attempting to pass, like full beard, everything, walking into female restrooms. I think that's where we get the biggest issues.
Well, I think there's two components to this. So the first one would be like, so if you advocate for the idea that like businesses should be able to essentially, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but essentially like discriminate against anybody that they wish, because it's like their private business or whatever. Like, I feel like the only way that we would be able to like kind of allow that to happen or tackle that question would be like how enforcement of that would play out. And then the second part would be, I have a hard time with this kind of argument where it's like, okay, you have somebody who is like male presenting, that attempts to use like a woman's bathroom. The solutions here are like twofold, right? So like we would do like some kind of screening at a bathroom, or we would just assume that anybody who is a man who is going into a woman's bathroom is going in for like the wrong reasons. So like even if we have somebody who's like a big burly, you know, like 6'5" lumberjack dude with like a huge beard and, you know, whatever, that walks into a woman's restroom, like even if that man does do something inappropriate in that restroom, like there's still going to be repercussions for it and consequences. It's not like the cops are just going to be like, oh, I'm so sorry, sir, I had no idea that you were trans, you're free to go. So I think like pragmatically, the idea of restricting access to these spaces based on like one appearance is kind of hairy. Because then you get like butch lesbians and stuff like that, where people are kind of excluded from these spaces. But at the same time, the only way that you could like feasibly enforce it would be like, honestly, like genital inspections, like maybe a chromosome scanner before you go in. Yeah, like there's no like feasible way to kind of make that happen. You know what I mean? Like that's why I get lost in this argument, because we like have to honor like self-ID, because otherwise, are we going to just like frisk people to like take a piss? I don't. Do you see what I'm saying?
No, I know exactly what you're saying. I don't think that there is a good way to way to do it. And I do say, I mean, I am somebody who advocates personal self-defense and everything like that, and I teach women self-defense. So that's the first and foremost step, is to teach to fight off something like that, because we know that criminals don't stop at signs, right? So at that point, somebody that's going to do that, but by and large, it's not trans women, but I think more of it comes from a comfort factor of making women feel uncomfortable. And like I said, if you're attempting to pass, then it's a little bit different than, or at least presenting in a different way. It's a little bit different than, like, if you look like a man that's going into the women's restroom. I think the restroom issue has kind of been played out, though. I think a lot of us are kind of on the same side, that what's the harm? Because I know, and I get into this with actual transphobic people all the time, that trans women are not predators. And actually I proved that, because there's 0.09% of men in prison, and there's 0.03% trans women in prison. There's 0.01% women in prison. So it's not a huge stat, but the stat they like to use is the sexual assault stat of how many of the trans women that are in prison. So it's a very nuanced debate when it comes to this stuff.
So we don't have to talk about bathrooms, I guess, specifically, because you brought up the Wii Spa. So like, yep. If a public business or like a private business that's like operating within a state that would have like these equal protection laws, like, what do you think the solution to that is? Like, how would we kind of make that not happen? Like, idealistically, like, if you were like, so the issue with the Wii Spa, like, my understanding is that California has had like these anti-discrimination laws for like 10 years, right? So like, any facility that is open to the public, if you are a trans person, you could use whatever facility you want. So I would assume going to like a spa or like a bathroom or a locker room or a changing room, that I would probably see a trans person. And then they're legally allowed to be in there and do whatever they want to do or whatever. So like, how pragmatically would we prevent, like, how would a business, so like, if you were a business owner, if you own the Wii Spa, and like, legality aside, like, what would you do to make sure that like trans people were not using like facilities where people would be uncomfortable? And additionally, and this is just kind of like a one-off that we can talk about a little bit later if you want, but like, whose uncomfortability is like more important, right? So like, the women in the women's changing room or whatever can be uncomfortable because there's a trans woman there. What about the comfortability of a trans woman that's forced to use like a men's restroom or a men's changing room? Like, which one do we put more weight into?
Well, like I said, if somebody's going to force me to go into a men's restroom or men's changing room, I'm just not going to go there. I don't want to force people to take my money that don't like me, and that tends to be what that means. So I'm just not going to go there. I don't think we should be forcing people to make that decision. I think in terms of private businesses and how they're going to figure that out, I think they have to. I mean, that's up to them. Like I said, I think that they can make the determination. Now, the law should be that they can't, violate your privacy and try to make you, like you said, generally checks or anything like that. No, but if they even have an inkling that you are not female and you're going into the female changing room, then I think then they can do whatever they want there. And I don't advocate for that, because like I said, I wouldn't go there. I think in terms of the Wii Spa situation, I mean, I use the restroom at the gym, but I've never been in a situation where I think I would ever, flash people or have my junk out while in there. It's not something. I think there is a certain level of respect. Now, if I was the Wii Spa, I mean, you can't, with the legalities, you can't do anything. They can't. They had no choice. But if they did, I think that they should have talked to that person's, especially when was reports of young girls in there, underage girls. I think that's definitely an issue when you're showing your genitals, because you're not female, you're showing your genitals, young girls in locker rooms.
I'm trying to think, because I think the problem that I run into with all of these arguments is just that there's no way to like legitimately enforce this. Even if like the legality issue aside, like if you are a private business owner, I don't think that there's really like a pragmatic way to enforce any of this. And I always keep coming back to the idea of the argument to preserve these spaces is in order to like facilitate like the comfortability of women in like a public space, right? But like
Yeah.
what about the comfortability of like people that want to use that public space in a way that like affirms themselves? Like I come back to that like scale of like which level of uncomfortability like do we value more? And it seems to me that by and large trans women in public spaces are like a non-issue, right? Like trans women aren't going into the bathroom to like, you know, like
Yeah.
harass people or flash people or attack people or whatever. So it seems like that fear is unwarranted or that uncomfortability is unwarranted. If there was like a legitimate grievance, right, where it's like, oh my God, like every day a trans woman comes in here and just stabs a bathroom attendant to death. Like, what are we going to do about this? But the reality is that like it's like a virtual non-issue. So I guess I just keep coming back to like if it's fine if like people are uncomfortable with it, but if that uncomfortability is like not justified, is there really a reason to even pursue like enforcing something like that?
I don't think so. Like I said, I'm not a fan of it. But I understand that they can do it. Even if they just wanted to look at you and say that you can't come in there based on the way that you present, I don't think that's our right to tell them that they have to. I think society tends to deal with these situations pretty well, especially in the current culture that we have. A lot of these businesses, unless they're in like a rural community, very, very, very transphobic conservative community, I think that we wouldn't have a lot of these issues. And it is really interesting, right? Because this has been, you know, we have the We Spa situation. Now that is a situation where I think it's pretty easy to tell because the person let everybody know that they were, you know, a trans woman. So that's a different situation there. But you have somebody. I mean, shoot, Blair White got kicked out of a restaurant for using the men's restroom. So I don't know.
So I have one more question. This is like a little bit more politics oriented.
Yep.
But so like you're of the idea that like private businesses should do whatever they want. The last time that I talked to Mars, it's been like 2 years since I've talked to Mars. He kind of had the same position where it was like businesses should be able to decide like what they want to do as far as like their customer base goes. And I think this was like around the time of the gay bakers. I'm sure you can
Yep.
remember that case with the cake and stuff like that. So my question would
Yep.
be, because you kind of brought up the idea of like rural towns or like conservative towns and things like that. Like what do we do for people that are like other, well, like you can pick like any demographic, right? That lives in like one of these highly conservative areas where they're unable to receive like services that they need. Do they just have to like go somewhere else? Like what are the protections for somebody like that? Under your
I
system,
think,
I mean.
yeah, I think we have to, we as a community get them into a different area, into a different situation. Because not only is that situation, if that's the only place that they can go, um, that situation is not even safe for them, right? If everywhere in that community doesn't like them or hates them, I think that they should be able to they need to reach out and we can get people to go in there. I think I'm a volunteerist, so I think that we can voluntarily help a lot of these people and get them out of there rather than force a company that doesn't like them to take their money. And you know, I don't like that idea. I don't like giving my money to people that don't like me. um and so like even in the cake baker, I I think that he has every right to deny it. I think that it was the right ruling for the wrong reasons. I think that he should be able to deny access to anybody for any reason. And I think an atheist should be able to deny baking a cake for a Christian if they want to for any reasons. I think that you know, the ruling based on religious grounds was actually the wrong ruling. I think it should just be for everybody.
I feel like this is a really good argument for like trans separatism. We should just have our own state, just like take over Hawaii or something. I don't know. Yeah, I feel like that would be like a whole other conversation, but I was just curious about that because to my recollection, Mars had a similar position to you, and I obviously disagree. I think that we should do our best to like facilitate spaces where people are able to access services that they need, and like people that are bigoted or ignorant, that they can just like suck it up because their money's green just like everybody else. And you know, I'm not a capitalist, but for people that are capitalists, money makes the world go round. So I mean, gay people's money is green, trans people's money is green. That's all it is, man. That's all it is.
Yeah, but money talks too. So when the full market decides not to go there, then they lose out on business. And I think that's one thing as well. Other than, like you said, in these small towns where it's one or two people. I grew up in a small town, so I get it. I've been around a lot of small towns and haven't really seen the discrimination that we would see. And I'll actually I'll send you a link to the article I wrote when we get done here, because it is. And again, I mean, politically, I'm a very much a libertarian. I'm a minarchist, so I'm very close to an anarchist. And so I definitely just think, like I said, I think that if you look at it, like I said, I don't believe in sex-based rights. I don't believe in trans rights, because I believe in human rights. And when you're looking at it, sex-based rights for women, and it's to your point, sex-based rights for women steps on trans rights, and trans rights step on women's rights in terms of privacy. So that's why I would leave it up to businesses to make what the rules in their establishments are.
I mean, I can see why you would think that way, but like that just argues separatism for me. And I think that it would lead to like the kind of the arguments that people have now, where we should have like a black state and a white state and a Hispanic state and a trans state and a gay state. And then that way, you know, like we're not going to run into issues, and it just turns into like a big separatist issue. Yeah.
Well, I think, I mean, but right now it's not a huge issue, because I don't think that, I think in society that we have right now, that we do absolutely, we're the most accepting society that we've ever seen in the history of the world right now, I think, especially in the US. Because I will admit, I think that there's a deeper divide in the UK than there is here in the US. I think that we are a lot closer here than what they have going on over there. And I think, like I said, everywhere I've gone, I've never run into any issues. So it's not saying that it doesn't happen. I just think, by and large, it's not a huge issue. I mean, when we see the corporatization of pride, I think that's when you know that we can allow businesses to kind of make some of these rules for themselves. And I don't think it's an issue, and I don't think it's a separatist issue, because I mean, 80% of the people in the United States believe in gay marriage. So I think, like I said, we're becoming more accepting in the world, mostly in the US right now, though.
Yeah, I worry like with the idea of like one that you know, like if you have a group of people or even like a single person in like an intolerant environment, like the idea of just being like, hey, as a community, we're going to move you over here, that sounds like a form of nationalism to me. But the other thing would be like, I mean, what is it going to look like when, you know, Amazon like buys everything and then it's just like tough shit? Like there is no free market anymore. The marketplace of ideas is dead. You have to shop at Jeff Bezos's Amazon center. And if you don't like trans people, you have to starve because you can't use your Alexa to order toilet paper or whatever, you know?
It's, well, yeah, that's why I mean, we could always go into the political conversation that we don't live in a capitalist society. We live in a corporatist society where government and Amazon are in bed together. And the reason why we push out all these small mom and pop shops is because government has given Amazon so much money to be able to run their operations.
Yeah, for sure. I think politics is definitely a different can of worms.
Yeah.
But I mean,
I wasn't planning on getting into politics coming in here, but it's
you're totally fine. But I am totally down with like this trans separatist shit. We should definitely like colonize Hawaii or something. Maybe not Hawaii. I don't know. Let's pick a better state. I don't know, like California, maybe. It's pretty there. We'll just pick a state and that's where we'll all go, and everybody else can have their shops without trans people, and all will be right in the world.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think it's as much of an issue. Even in the US, I think the last study I read, it was 62% of women support trans people, even in their spaces. And it's in the UK, it's like 55. So
Turf Island is a
different majority, by and large, the majority do support, you know, this. So I think, again, I get welcomed into women's spaces by women, and if I ever questioned differently, they would tell me to knock it off. So that's different because I live in Atlanta, which is a pretty accepting place. But I grew up in a small town in Michigan, and I have no issues going back home and hanging out with everybody there, and everybody there is fairly accepting as well.
Which is good. I also have found supportive enclaves even in really conservative areas, so I know they exist. I do feel very horribly for people that get like fucked over, and that's something that I think, you know, if you don't want to bake the gay cake, we're gonna deport you. Sorry, it's very un-American of you. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. But I and that is part of the thing too, because if somebody's in a community that's not accepting of them, a lot of times it is because, and unfortunately in our community we still do see quite a bit parents not being accepting, which is really interesting because we know that a lot of parents are accepting of other people's kids, but don't get it when it's their kids, right? So
definitely,
it's really, it's one of those situations where even in those situations, I really just feel bad for people that would be stuck in that situation. And that's why I would think that as a community, we could pull them out of a situation where they're stuck there. Because if everybody like in that area I mean, that would be a miserable life, in my opinion, living in an area that nobody likes who you are and stuff like that, or absolutely hates you. I mean, that would be a scary situation. So like I said, I think as a community, we can pull people out of those situations. I don't think we need to force them to bake the cake.
I think that we should just do the trans state. I think we should do it. I'm glad that we
I mean, you
settled
keep
it
coming
all.
back to it, so I mean, let's just work on it.
I think it's a great idea, honestly. Like then we would have our own trans prisons. We would have our own trans baking shops. We would have our own trans Amazons. It sounds amazing. Like I think that you've sold me on it. I think you've sold me on it.
Okay, cool. We'll set it up.
We'll set it up. I'm down. I'm down. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about? We kind of talked about everything that I thought was interesting. The ROGD, the self-ID, affirmation only care. Was there anything else that you wanted to bend my ears about, or?
Not right now. I definitely wanted to thank you. I applaud you a lot for having these types of conversations. Thanks for being completely civil. Like I absolutely, I've been trying to get people to come on my channel that do this, so maybe I'll reach out here pretty soon, and we'll do that on my channel.
Yeah,
I am going to post this to my channel as well.
Please feel free.
And I'll promote it, and maybe some people come over and check out your stuff, because I think it is really interesting. And I applaud you a lot for having detransitioners on your channel, because I know that's an area that's a lot of people like to shy away from. And
they're hard conversations to have, but they're definitely important.
Yeah. So, I mean, when it comes, I guess I'll ask you about that though. When it comes to like detransitioning, how do you feel? Because obviously you feel like we should be still having these conversations. Buck said they're gold to our community. What do you think?
I think that Buck Angel takes a complete diametrically opposed stance to me when it comes to this. I do not agree with Buck Angel on anything. I have thoughts about him of my own. But I think that the biggest problem for me is that the reason that I go out of my way to talk to detransitioners is because most detransitioners are not the stereotypical Kira Bell, who is really eager to jump in bed with gender critical people, with TERFs, with radical feminists in order to make transition harder for other people. Those are the people that have a platform. Those are the people whose voices are loudest. And those people are always weaponized against us being able to continually access services that a lot of us need. So I go out of my way to talk to detransitioners because most, if not all of them, are of the predilection that like, yeah, I made a mistake. It wasn't right for me. That was unfortunate, but I know that it's right for other people, and that's okay. And that's something that I think that we really need to lift up. Not the idea that like, you know, Kirabel detransitioned, like, oh, we can't let anybody under 16 touch hormone blockers because, oh my God, like what if? But the idea of like, okay, like this isn't always the right choice for somebody, and that's fine, and that's totally okay. And that's something that we need to talk about, because people are under the implication that transition is the only route, but we know that there are other routes, and we know that by and large medical transition is like beneficial for most people that pursue it, and the people that get fucked over by it, like they definitely need to talk about it.
Yeah, I agree, because there are definitely, and that's what we were talking about with therapists earlier. I think that sometimes we see those situations where therapists are just so eager to come out of one meeting with a child and say we need to get, you know, puberty blockers in your child ASAP. So we need to be able to talk about that. And we need to be able to give, I think, we need to get kids and adults alike both sides of the story, because I think me and you are out here. We show that it can be a very positive thing. I mean, a lot of people that are in our situation say it saved their life. And then you talk to detransitioners who still have dysphoria, but transitioning wasn't exactly the right step for them. And so they've taken other steps to deal with that dysphoria. And so I think that, absolutely, I think that by and large, they're not the ones out here, at least none of the ones I know are out here, saying that being trans is the wrong step. I do see it a lot in like the trans kids. Like if I mentioned this the other day, on Transhood on HBO, there is the 4-year-old, and that mom did a complete 180. I think that's what happens a lot with the moms that go full bore with their trans kids, and then they say, well, trans people aren't real at that point. So I do see that a lot in that situation, but not as much in the detransition situation. I think that they typically just want to make sure that people are making the right choices for them.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that's really important too. And the idea that people will propagate, and I've seen this is something that's always bothered me. A lot of people in the trans community are pretty negative towards detransitioners, and I think that's because of the idea that a lot of detransitioners are weaponized against us. However that comes about. But you have people like Mark Angelo Cummings, like Kira Bell, like people that like are kind of on board with this gender critical movement that like nobody should transition because it wasn't right for me. Fuck, even people like Scott Nugent. Like these are the people that are like being weaponized against us. And these are the people that are the loudest and the most prevalent because it's the most interesting, juicy story that they can put on CNN. But the reality is that most people, like these people are trans, but transitioning just wasn't the right fit for them. And that's okay. And those are the people that we should be talking to. And those are the people that should be talking about like detransitioning and desisting and stuff like that. Not like these fucking lunatics that are like, oh my God, like I took hormones and I died and then was revitalized and I came back to tell the good word of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, and all trans people are going to hell. Like we should just not give those people the time of day. I think that's why I think it's important to talk to detransitioners, because you only hear the really wild ones, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I like I said, I definitely appreciate that, because, and that's one of the reasons why when I started looking at your stuff, I'm like, oh, okay. And I started watching some of your videos. So I definitely, yeah, I think that that's one of the areas where, like you said, I think our community has a habit of trying to throw them under the bus because they do bunk the narrative. But I think it's important to hear their voices as to why they thought they were trans in the first place and why they detransitioned. And like I said, I'm not a huge fan of Kira Bell because that whole situation was just a little bit weird. I don't even know why they would put somebody on puberty blockers at the age of 16. And then you made the choice to have double mastectomy at 20 years old. So you were an adult at that point. So I don't think that's a very good person to be having speak on, detransitioning for kids.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with that. The other thing that I did want to bring up, and this is just the petty in me. I have the link to I watched your article with your video with Buck Angel, and Buck Angel was talking about how like the article that he co-authored with everybody about the trans men fighting back or whatever. He said that he doesn't mention AGP in it, and it's like in the first paragraph, and it's mentioned like 30 times. I was just curious if you've actually read that article or not.
Yeah, so that's what I've been asking. Send me that article, which one you guys are looking at, because I think I don't even think we're having the conversation on the right article right now. Because
I had to get it from the web archive because they took it down.
Yeah, it was archived. They told me it was archived.
Yeah, this one should be the right link if it will open for me.
Yeah, that one didn't open for me. Because I looked and I read a video article that somebody posted, and it was the Trans Men Speak Out article, and I didn't see AGP listed on it at all. So I've been just trying to see if I'm even reading the right article.
Fuck, mine isn't loading. I can try and get another link for you, but I read it when it first came out, and I took a screenshot of it. I have a screenshot of it somewhere. But he was like, "Yeah, we didn't even mention AGP in the article," and it's like the first word of like the second paragraph. So I just thought that was funny. I was just curious.
Well, like I said, I actually thought I might have even I questioned it because I didn't see AGP in the article that I read, and I know I said I didn't see it, so I was trying to see if I read the article that everybody's talking about. But at the same point, I think, I mean, if you want just talk about AGP real quick. It's like, I don't think that we should be demonizing AGP. It's a label for people that we're looking. Like I told Buck, I think that the gender critical community tries to use it as a weapon against trans people when it should be kind of accepted, if it is even real. But we need, I mean, a lot of the stuff we need more studies on in a lot of ways. And I think people like in the sexology community, they're afraid of the answers in some of these studies, I think, too, because especially after Dr. So's book came out.
Yeah,
and I would actually encourage reading Dr. So's book for anybody in the audience, because
the End of Gender.
I think,
that's a doozy.
So most, did you read it? So I mean,
did.
At least for the first 5 chapters, I think it's very informative and very I actually think it's really trans positive, trans friendly, because she says multiple times this is not to be used against trans people, but to, broaden horizon and try to get more of these studies out there. And that's the problem, is we're seeing a lot of these studies halted and stuff like that. And I think we can all do well.
I have the book. I can reread it if you want, and we can talk about it sometime if you would like. I'd be definitely down to do that. Yeah. That sounds good to me. I forget what the other thing I was going to say was. It just like flew out of my head. Just left me. Oh, the AGP thing. Yeah, I just thought I just wanted to bring that up because I thought it was funny. I was watching that video and he was like, "Yep, it's not even mentioned in the article." And I was like, "Jesus Christ, did you even read the own article that you co-authored?" Like, geez. So I sent that to you. The link does work. If you wanted to take a look at it. I think that autogynephilia, or like how Blanchard describes it, I don't think it exists, but I think that in the way that he describes it, if it were a thing, that's just like a normal part of like sexuality, is like being attracted to yourself, or like being attracted, or like feeling attractive as yourself, or things like that. Like, I think that's a pretty normal part of like human sexuality. I don't think it's like a weird bad thing. I know that like if it does exist, it is weaponized like pretty heavily against trans people, but like there are cis women that are autogynephiles that are like turned on about the idea of being women. You know what I mean? So I mean, I don't think that it means anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I actually made a joke on Twitter the other day because somebody had just posted something. They said, it wasn't even anybody in our community, but it was like, if I think about myself while masturbating, is that it was something like that. And I'm like, well, that sounds pretty autogynephilia. Does that I mean, autogynephilia just means self-love. So if you really,
Yeah, that's basically like, if it is a real concept, which I do not believe it is, it just sounds like a normal part of like human sexuality, like quite literally feeling yourself. It sounds pretty normal to me. Like, just personally, that's just my.
I don't think anybody thinks it should be weaponized against trans people, but it does get used to try to invalidate trans people. And I mentioned that to Buck the other day, and he agreed. So I don't know.
Well, thank you for taking time out of your day to come on and chit chat. I'll definitely be in touch, because I think it would be really cool to talk about the End of Gender, because I thought that book was a very difficult journey for me and my brain cells. So I'd be happy to talk about it. I think that would be interesting for sure. Right now I'm rereading Irreversible Damage on stream. This will be the second time that I've read it, unfortunately. So I do those on Tuesdays. If you're interested in checking those out, or if anybody in your audience is interested in checking them out, I stream them on Twitch. And it's a fun time. It's a fun time for us all to scream into the void together.
Yeah. I mean, I read that too. I do like Abigail's book. I think a lot of it's again, it just talks about a lot of the parents though, and in those studies as well. So I get it.
It also just reads like a bad middle school girl's diary. It is not written well, in my humble opinion. But everybody has different styles of literature that they like, I suppose. And it's very
I know. But I have to listen to it on audiobook, so I get it.
I feel like that's almost a little bit worse. I feel like having it like yelled into your ears, like a little bit more aggressive than like being able to like wince and look away, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
But thank you again. If you wanted
thanks for having me on.
Yeah, if you wanted to shout yourself out, or if you have any links or anything that you want me to drop, I'm happy to drop them. I'll also upload this to YouTube when I'm done with it. Yeah, if you would like to.
Yeah, it's my YouTube channel is youtube.com/Sara Higdon. There's no H in my Sara, so SARA. And then my Twitter handle is Sara_H225. And then you can just find my link tree on there, and you can find whatever I've done. So, yeah, I definitely, like I said, thanks for having me on. I think, like I said at the beginning, I think these conversations are really important, because I think we can come together on a lot of issues. I don't think our community is as divided as we think. I think that, like we talked about before, that some of the loudest people on each side are the ones that are getting a lot of the attention. And I think we can come to some of these agreements, and if we can come to agreements, we can start there and work together on those things, and then work on the other things once we solve some of these issues. Like, I point out actual transphobes on Twitter all the time. I call them out, and I say say, if we could come together just to call these people out and fight this rhetoric, I think we would be in a much better place, and we would, instead of yelling at each other all day, I think we kind of yell at each other into the void, like you said, into the void all day, because we're just yelling into deaf ears.
Yeah, and I mean, we have to all get along in our transnationalist state, so we have to start somewhere. Otherwise, the commune will fall apart very quickly.
We'll work on that too. We'll work on that.
Definitely. Well, I will definitely be in touch. Thank you again for your time. I very much so appreciate it, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yep, you too. Thanks.